Thank you for joining us on another edition of Against the Current, coming to you from the Skyline Club atop the Old Republic Building in downtown Chicago. Pleased to have as our guest this week Charles Thomas, the venerable political reporter for ABC-7 in Chicago. Charles, thanks so much for joining us.
Venerable. What is that?
Respected, revered, highly regarded.
Venerable, not old.
No. Venerable, like the Old Republic Building from which we come.
Oh, okay.
Respected, beloved, a figure on the landscape of Chicago. Appreciate you joining us for some pretty wild times.
Oh, man.
In the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. I mean, they're kind of, one is kind of a microcosm of the other to a large extent.
You know, I had the opportunity to go to New Hampshire to cover the New Hampshire primary. But I heard that Barack Obama is coming to Chicago on Wednesday.
Yeah.
I said, look, I got to stay here and cover that. Because there's just so much story here that, for me at least, it just overwhelms even what's happening nationally.
So he comes to return to the General Assembly, where he put together such a storied career. And I assume there'll be some kind of ceremonial vote present to remind us all of his days in the state senate, then a beer summit with Tony Resco. Oh, what else do you expect?
Oh, this is that kind of show.
Well, this is just what I'm anticipating. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just guessing. I'm spitballing here. What may be on the president's agenda? What do you think's on the president's agenda?
Well, he's supposed to come there and talk about, hey, why can't we all get along politically?
Yeah.
Democrats and Republicans, and what better place to do that than Springfield in the House chamber, when you have all 77 of them?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, to sitting there who've been at odds for the past, forever, and they're supposed to come to some kind of realization, kumbaya moment after the president speaks.
So this is going to
spanks them perhaps, and then tells them to get along.
This is going to be a repeat then of the 2004 convention speech. There's no red Illinois. There's no blue Illinois. There's just Illinois.
There's a purple Illinois.
There's a purple Illinois. But I mean, the timing of this is interesting, and as you say, the advanced billing of him coming here to suggest that he can be some kind of conduit for resolution of the budget impasse and all of the other matters that ail Illinois and Chicago. So what's the Democrat Party dynamic where he comes in and fosters some kind of common ground, particularly between Speaker Madigan and Governor Rauner, on issues from pension reform to the Chicago public school system to workers' comp, all these state-level issues? How does that work out? What does the Democrat Party think? How do they conceive this working out exactly?
Well, a couple of things to consider, and that is that he knows these people.
Right.
He's been around them. He's worked with them. I mean, my goodness, he's worked with the mayor of the city of Chicago, at the White House. I mean, that was his first chief of staff.
Right.
So I have to believe that he's talked to Rahm Emanuel about this. And I'm sure that Rahm Emanuel has told the president what his particular agenda is, what he wants to get accomplished for the city of Chicago in that conversation. I just have to believe that. Now, John Cullerton, apparently, with whom Barack Obama served in the Illinois Senate for those years, apparently was the one who wrote the letter, that the most recent letter inviting him.
Right.
But then Steve Brown, who is Speaker Madigan's spokesperson, says the speaker wrote a letter like this years ago. But very interestingly, the speaker has not acknowledged that the leader of the free world is going to come and make this unprecedented speech to his chamber. And a lot of us in the newsroom, if you will, are asking each other, well, why hasn't the speaker made a statement? Cullerton made a statement welcoming the president. Governor Rauner made a statement welcoming the president to Springfield, but the speaker has been silent.
So what's the interpretation of his silence?
The interpretation of that is that maybe he didn't know. Maybe they made this agreement for the president to come without really getting the speaker's input or his okay, if you will, because after all, this is the speaker's kingdom.
Right.
This is where he rules. So you mean to tell me this other guy is going to come in and sort of Bigfoot Mike Madigan in his own house, and Mike Madigan didn't know about it? That's perhaps telling. I can't tell you, and I'm not going to draw any conclusions about what it means, but maybe the mayor and maybe Cullerton are looking for some political cover, if you will, to make a deal. with the governor to maybe concede some of those quote unquote Democratic Party core values that the speaker likes to talk about, why he can't make a deal with the governor? Maybe Barack is going to disarm some of that when he comes and, again, give the mayor, Collerton, and some individual members some political cover.
But if what you're intimating is that the speaker is not going to enjoy being bigfooted in his house, and by his house I mean the state of Illinois, then how exactly does that move Mike Madigan off the dime to allow his members to vote for whatever potential deal is afoot among Collerton and Rahm and the president? I mean, and let's not forget, Collerton and Madigan, these are people who are intimately acquainted. They're the godfather for each other's kids. So this is not like they're not allies as well. So, I mean, how does that triangulate Madigan to get him to do things he doesn't want to do, like stop writing property tax laws and doing property tax?
Well, I mean, I think if you start, okay, for instance, a lot of individual downstate and suburban Democrats right now, they're very concerned about how it will look for them as they're trying to run for re-election if they have to vote for a bill to support the Chicago public schools.
Yeah, sure.
So maybe they're more in agreement with the governor than they are with Speaker Madigan, but until now they've been afraid, really, to speak out against Speaker Madigan, or as our friend Ken Duncan likes to say, run off the plantation.
Yes.
Maybe they were afraid to do that, but if they think that Barack Obama has said, hey, cut a deal.
Yeah, but Barack Obama gives a speech and then he goes away.
Of course.
They're still here, and they're here, and particularly those downstaters that are in target districts. And most of them are reliant on Mike Madigan for the funding to support their reelection campaigns. President Obama going to come back in the fall and campaign for state legislative candidates? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
So I mean, they're not.
But I think
they may be cowardly. They may have a deficit of bone marrow in their spine, but they're self-interested. So don't they still see their survival in the House in particular running through the Speaker's office?
I think a lot of them right now know that there are safe havens out there. They just don't know how safe they are yet. And a lot of them are thinking now about, they're looking at the Duncan situation. Didn't he get a big contribution or something like that lately?
He did. He got $500,000 from the Illinois Opportunity Project, which is a C4 organization with which I'm affiliated.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yes.
they look at that and they say, "Whoa, well maybe there's actually a refuge out there." They think about stuff like that because that PAC is not the only one out there that might help.
Right.
You know, if they would ask.
And also, but this is kind of a key point because I think this has been lost in some of the conversation about the changing dynamic. Ken Duncan received support because he acted independently. Then he got the support. What happens with Mike Madigan is you get support and then you do what you're told to do. That's very different. I mean, Ken Duncan was acting independently before Bruce Rauner ever got to town. He voted for James Meeks' school choice bill in 2010. So he has shown a streak of independence. Now, Ken Duncan and I aren't aligned on all the issues, certainly, but on some very important ones, like school choice for kids that are being discriminated against based on their household income and address in Chicago. We are on Ken Duncan saying, no, the governor should retain his power to negotiate directly with the public sector unions. He shouldn't be taken away from the bargaining table, so we have true adversarial bargaining like you do in the private sector between labor and management. That's another example. So Ken Duncan is maybe hearing from some non-traditional partners with respect to his reelection and his political fortune because of what he did prior to enjoying that support, not because he said, I'm going to do what these other people are going to tell me to do, and then he got, it's a big difference.
It's a big difference. But if you see an example because people understand what Ken Duncan has been doing. As you mentioned, this just didn't start last week.
Right.
But if they see that if you exhibit some independence and that you can survive politically, then perhaps they'll make that leap and they'll do the same thing. And I think that's what you might be seeing the groundwork being late for that. I mean, and the president coming in and telling people to get along and to cooperate and to give. I think that it all fits together. There's a certain synergy in this that I don't think the president is coming here to basically talk about Democratic Party core values. He's talking about creating some kind of hybrid political reality that gets things done. That Illinois is a classic example. I mean, Washington's a big example, but Illinois, I think, is a classic example of what happens when you don't have that kind of mutual respect for each other's ideas. You know, one thing I've learned as a political reporter is that there are great ideas on both sides. And that's one thing that I think a lot of Democrats, particularly in a place like Illinois, forget. I'm talking rank and file Democrats here. They basically knee-jerk and vote the party and not the issue. They don't vote their own interests in so many cases.
Yeah.
And a classic example of that might be, the discussion about right to work. The governor had this program where he wanted to have so-called empowerment zones, where you could
local units of government could create right to work zones.
Right to work zones. And I think before he pulled it off the table, he said, "Hey, just give me 5 around the state, just so I could show you how this can work." And I immediately thought of 5. I said, "Man, you could go to Harvey, you could go to Rockford, you could go to," because it wasn't going to happen in Cook County. That was the thing.
Right.
You could go to, you could go to Harvey. You could go to, well, that's in Cook County, but Rockford, East St. Louis.
You could go to a lot of places.
Peoria.
Peoria,
And
Decatur.
I said to myself, well, why doesn't the Black Caucus get behind that? I mean, that would be something you could do. And maybe you could go in there and negotiate and say, hey, okay, we'll go for this, but you're going to have to pay a living wage. Maybe not the minimum wage, but you have to pay a living wage. Maybe that's a middle ground within that. But instead of that, they toed the core value line, went shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the party and said, no, you may not, when they've got unemployment like you would not believe. I mean, 90%, is that what the Urban League just said? Of 85, 90% of young black males unemployed?
UIC study.
Yeah.
16 to 19-year-olds, black, 88% unemployment. Latinos, 85%. 20 to 24-year-old black people, 41% unemployment compared to Latinos, 19%, whites, 7%. 20 to 24. So, you're getting out of school now.
Yeah.
Now you're an adult.
Right. Now, check it out. And then you've got this governor who's a billionaire, at least that's what they said during the last campaign.
Right.
32 years in the venture capital business, swearing up and down, I will bring you companies to these empowerments. I will do it, and I know I can do it because I've done that all my professional life. And you say to him, hey, let him do it. Let him give it a go. If he can do it, are you gonna complain? I mean,
yeah, because
what's the deal?
The deal is their bread is buttered by the public sector unions.
Right. But I mean, the thing is, but if people start to, particularly black folks, start looking at this as part of a continuum of their struggle, then they can separate and do things in their own interests. I mean, right now, the mayor and Alderman Anthony Beale in the 9th Ward opened this so-called method soap plant on the south side. Man, they had balloons and dancers and the whole bit. Opening this plant, it's called the Method Soap Plant or whatever, in the Pullman neighborhood. And non-union plant. And the mayor was down there profiling and Anthony Beale. And I asked him, I said, well, isn't this one of those kind of like empowerment zone, right to work kind of places, I mean, this is basically what Rounder's talking about, right? Oh, no. I said, but it is. And you're celebrating it. What's going on? Saying how you brought jobs.
Right.
I mean,
they're completely unbounded by their own hypocrisy. That's
exactly
what's going on.
I mean, and you're going like, well, wait a minute. And I'm kind of walking away, scratching my head. What did I just see? But I mean, you what I'm saying is that you have to separate reform and your own people's struggle from partisan politics. And that's what's happening.
Let me ask
tragically.
let me ask you a question about President Obama's visit. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit for the capacity to feel shame, but he's coming back to the city of Chicago, which has a higher murder per capita rate than L.A. and New York combined. The worst governed city in the state, major city in the country, I should say, the worst governed state in the country.
I'll give you that.
And this is the place that he calls home. This is the place he spent a decade in the state Senate and almost a full term as a U.S. Senator. It's kind of embarrassing to see what's happened to Chicago when Democrats have controlled Chicago for a century and effectively controlled Illinois at the state level for the better part of the last 3 generations. I mean, do you think there's a certain kind of, this has all happened on our watch and we can only get away with kind of muddying the waters for so long, and people are going to start looking around and saying, well, I look at these unemployment numbers, I look at the body count, I look at who's being killed, I look at who's not being employed, and I look at who I keep voting for, and at some point people wake up and say, well, this isn't working. Maybe I need to try something qualitatively different, not dissimilar to what you see happening at the national level with the excitement behind Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump for similar reasons, although different constituencies.
I think that Barack Obama at some level is a human being, an individual. He's got a brain. Some of that has got to be running through his head as he writes whatever remarks he will make before the General Assembly, and he's got to be thinking about that, and that's got to be part of it. Now, I don't think he'll come up and say, "Hey, I'm sorry." He's not going to do that.
No.
But he's got to be thinking of it, and that's got to be part of the equation here, and what he has to address at some point. Well, he probably won't address some of that pathology that you just mentioned because he's probably embarrassed by that. And I think during his first term, he didn't address any of it because he didn't want to be the black president during his first term because he was afraid he might not get reelected. But I think in this second term, I think he is doing a few more things that are more focused on what's happening, in particular to African Americans.
What about his?
I don't know about this speech Wednesday, but
what about the irony of him coming to town to give a speech where the discussion dominating Chicago right now is the potential bankruptcy of the Chicago public school system, but the prospect of another teacher strike at some point between now and May, possibly. But certainly, and I hear on the street that the auditing arm of Ernst & Young, an outfit called Parthenon, has been advising CPS. Now, they were the advisors to Detroit after they went bankrupt and had to reorganize. And their conclusion is there ain't no way out for CPS that doesn't include bankruptcy. So the President of the United States coming to town, hailing from Hyde Park, Kenwood, didn't send his kids to public school when he was here. Didn't send them to public school in D.C. Rahm doesn't either. Arnie Duncan doesn't. Forrest Claypool doesn't. But for the 88% of kids in CPS, most of whom don't get to go to the magnet schools.
And what was that number about unemployment? Okay, go
right. 88% unemployment, 88%, right, in schools that are failing them and have been failing those neighborhoods for generations. Boy, that's kind of difficult to skirt around when it's all your folks, as you said, that you've been working with for decades, going back to when you were in the state Senate, and you come to town and CPS is finally at its day of reckoning.
Well, those are the dots that voters have got to begin to connect. As a reporter, I think that I have begun to connect a lot of those dots in my work. And it hasn't been, and I think a lot of people, particularly electeds, African American electeds, have given me a lot of grief lately. I mean, I've been catching it because people are saying, well, why did you? I said, no, it's just facts. And I'm connecting dots. And I'm telling you. I mean, the other thing, too, is that the biggest problem in the African American community right now is the lack of jobs and economic development.
Well, I think,
okay,
but I think you have to take one step back and say, The lack of jobs, economic development, yes, and those West Side and South Side shooting galleries, of course, people aren't going to locate a business or start a business where they're not safe. Nobody is, and nobody should. But before that is, if you're not coming out of high school prepared to go on to post-secondary education or with the skills to add value in a work environment, then of course you're not going to get a job because you weren't even given the opportunity to acquire the skills you need to be self-sufficient. So why should we be surprised? I mean, this is a conversation I have too. Is like, look, if I was on the West Side or South Side, rather than fortunate enough to grow up in Wheaton and have my parents sacrifice to send me to a good school, and I saw nothing. I went to Fanger High School. I'm going to Fanger High School at 112th and Wallace. A school for 2,800 kids, and there's enrollment of 215, and 40% show up on a daily basis. I mean, so it's like people just kind of go there to pass the time, and nobody's getting educated. Nobody has in a long time, and they've got to worry about their physical safety to and from school, even sometimes at school. Darien Albert. Would I tend to engage potentially or be susceptible to destructive behavior? Would I be selling drugs on the street corner? Would I be in a gang? I don't know. I can't say that. So if that's your socialization when you're 8, 9, and 10 years old, and there's nothing around you and nobody throwing you a life preserver, and then we say, well, 16 and 19-year-olds and 20 and 24-year-olds, they can't get jobs. Of course they can't get jobs. They don't even, a job is a foreign concept. And so is reading and writing and doing math at grade
in
level.
that same community where you have 24, 25-year-olds, you also have 8 and 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that's where you would begin the process of trying to save them. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to do what you can on the 24, 25-year-old level, but when you talk about the 8 and 9-year-olds, and that's where lives are born or lost.
8, 9, 10 years old once.
Right.
You don't get to go back.
You don't get to go back. And I think that's where you don't find a lot of opportunity for young people. I mean, sometimes it really frustrates me in covering politics is every 4 years I will hear about $1 billion that candidates have spent trying to get elected president of the United States.
Sure.
But that's when the money stops at the end of the campaign. And suddenly all those people that care so much about America that they're going to spend all this money trying to get a candidate elected, they don't spend any more money after the election's over in trying to resurrect these neighborhoods or trying even to find voters and support in those neighborhoods.
Well, but I mean, look, the Chicago public school system, $5.5 billion. Spending at CPS has gone like this in the last 20 years, not like this. So It's gone up at a 45-degree angle. What do we have to show for it?
Not much. We don't have anything to
We have
show
a
for
bankrupt school system that hasn't educated any more kids than they were educating 20 years ago. And so when you have people that don't live in those neighborhoods look at this and they start to understand, wait, you spend $15,000 per kid. That's more than we spend in Wheaton, which all the kids are going to college, and you're not moving the needle at all. I'm okay. It reminds me of what Jimmy John Leotude, the founder of Jimmy John's sandwich joints, said when he moved his corporate headquarters from Champaign to Florida, fled like so many other businesses. He said, look, I've been successful in life. I don't mind paying taxes. The thing that upsets me is the money I send to Springfield, it's not spent on what they tell me it's going to be spent on. They might as well light it on fire. And that's, I think, what you see taxpayers at large. Nobody likes to see kids not getting educated, kids in violent neighborhoods, people not getting access to quality health care. I mean, the good thing about America is we're a generous people. We're a charitable people. But I think you have a lot of people in this state that don't suffer from the same strain of Stockholm syndrome that afflicts the people inside the corporate boundaries here that are just, tired of it. I'm not going to be a pigeon over and over again. What kind of sense does that make? I'm just supposed to continue to write blank checks to Springfield or to bail out the city of Chicago, and we see nothing improve as a result? Well, then I'm out.
Oh, well, but the mayor and Forrest Claypool say they've been making tremendous gains. As Richard M. Daley said for 20 years, that, they're making these great gains, and they show you test scores and such, but at the same time you see numbers like that 88%. And you go, well, where do these people come from? Well, it basically was BS. I mean, we're getting a lot of that, and the mayor and Forrest Claypool are saying now that we can't put the academic gains of the last few years at risk. We keep hearing that
Right.
over and over as a mantra.
But what they're really saying is we don't want to be the guys on whose watch CPS formally declares bankruptcy, because that will be a permanent black mark on our record. It's about their political fortunes. It's not about the educational fortunes of Chicago families.
Exactly, and I think that's what we've come to in Illinois. We've come to a political class that is about self-preservation, as opposed to doing anything for its constituencies. And I think hopefully the president will talk about that. Maybe he's been liberated because he is a lame duck. He isn't going to run for anything else, I presume. Maybe the president will say that. I mean, I'm looking forward to this speech. Again, like I said, I don't want to go to New Hampshire. I want to be here in Illinois to hear what he says, because I think, at least locally, at least to me, this will have some real. This is where you build a legacy. I mean, can you really abandon partisan politics for however long you're going to speak to really tell it like it is? We'll see. We'll see that on Wednesday.
Do you think he's coming to town in Rahm's mind now? And Rahm sees this as a way for him to make the long climb back from the depths to which he has sunk. Because Rahm, he's like a cockroach. He's just looking at survival.
Well, he's looking at survival, but he's a cockroach with a big shoe hanging over his head, like about to get. Maybe
the shoe of Damocles over his head.
Or maybe the shoe's already hit him, and he's a cockroach on the edge, trying to get out from under it.
But I mean, do you think he's looking for political cover from President Obama to do the right thing finally, to make difficult decisions?
A lot of politicians are.
Or is it just him like, I got 3 years to 2019, and I can survive. I can come back.
No, I think a lot of politicians are looking for some political cover. I mean, Rahm needs it in the worst way. I mean, he's trying to be a progressive. Rahm Emanuel's trying to be a progressive, which really is not his. That's not his breed.
Being a human being doesn't seem to be much of his breed.
That's you.
That's my opinion.
That's your opinion.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think he wants. He's been calling himself a progressive, but he's got to see the reality of what. I mean, I think what this state authority does, and what a bankruptcy would do to another degree, it provides fresh eyeballs to look at the situation.
Well, it also brings in the Kelvin Orrs of the world, the emergency manager in Detroit, who says, "Look, I'm not a politician. I'm not running for office. I'm not going to run for office. I'm just looking at the balance sheet.
I'm looking,
and here's who's taking how much of a haircut.
Here's who's taking a haircut, and we don't need this guy. What do we have these people here? Right. It's like the whole Barbara Byrd Bennett and the soups thing. What would an outside eyeball say about that? They'd say, well, why do we need these people? What are these people doing? Can't you do that for yourself? That's $20 million we could put into the classroom. But those are the kinds of eyeballs that we need, and those are the issues on which the political class in Illinois cannot be trusted.
And Karen Lewis
can't be trusted.
And Karen Lewis has said that Governor Rauner's proposition to have a state takeover of CPS and install a new superintendent, those are the ravings of a madman.
Well, because she has an interest here. I mean, the teachers union has a vested interest. They have equity in the system. After all, I mean, the system has been making deals with the teachers union for a long time, and they don't want their deals dismantled. And if a bankruptcy court should take over, they would say, well, hey, we're going to have to adjust the contract. I mean, and all of that. And even when you talk about pensions, I mean, how do pensions, the state law, the state constitution shall not be diminished or impaired? When the federal court gets involved, it's like, yo, we're going to have to maybe do some impairing or some diminishing in order to make this whole thing work. And I think so she has a great fear of that, and her members have a fear of that because they don't know how it's going to affect their bottom line individually and collectively. So there's going to be a lot of pushback. But when you think about everything that and looking at the big picture,
do you think there's an opportunity against the backdrop we've been talking about that you were just describing for there to be a new paradigm in Chicago, new coalitions built, non-traditional allies, leadership at the ward level as well as the mayoral level and on up the food chain that you haven't seen in Chicago in a long, long time. Not the next guy in line, not the guy that's kind of melded the C-suite executives and the public sector unions and the minority neighborhoods like Daley did for 20 years and like Rahm has done for the past 2 cycles largely. Is there a chance to make a clean break and do something different than we've done in Chicago for 175 years?
There is a conversation underway, and it's not necessarily a conversation that's going on in the political class. I think that for instance, among state lawmakers, Speaker Madigan is in control. But out there in the neighborhoods, and if I can go farther, and I'm talking about African Americans, okay? In the neighborhoods, there's a conversation. Keep in mind that you have African Americans not only living in the city, but the core of the black electorate today is in the suburbs.
Sure.
It's in Thornton Township.
South
It's in
County.
Proviso Township.
Right. Yeah, Westcote
And
County. Right.
People are out there who pay taxes.
Yeah.
Okay? They pay taxes, and they have homes, and they get those tax bills too. And they're concerned about what their lawmakers are doing. And they're concerned why they are not representing them. And I think that as this conversation continues, you could see for instance, a black caucus that begins to compartmentalize its politics. Well, we need to worry about, if we're concerned about schools, then how come our lawmakers aren't cutting a deal to help those African American and Latino children and get away from this partisan stuff and think about what they can do for our children? And there are things they can do. Just, can you imagine what would happen if all 20 African American lawmakers in the House suddenly decided that they're going to form a coalition with the Republicans in the House, and they're going to basically have some control in a deal to run a statewide authority. In other words, take the schools away from Rahm Emanuel and Forrest Claypool, whose children don't even attend public schools, and take some control back. Is that outlandish? They don't have to become Republicans.
No.
They don't have to become anything except to take control of their schools again, back from the powers that be.
Is a conversation that you say is going on, is it going on now such that, forget the R versus D thing, is it going on now such that we need to rethink how this whole thing is organized and who's benefiting from it? So, for example, I don't care if it's white Republicans or black Democrats or black Republicans and whatever. I want money that I'm control to help support where I want to send my kid, wherever my kid can get into, whatever the best option is for it. Just to use that as an example, because it seems like there's maybe an opportunity there.
Okay, if we're talking about like charter schools, for instance, I mean, there are good charter schools, there's bad ones, and I think everybody wants a good charter school for their kid. But they want a choice. They want the best possible outcome they can get. They want the best that they can get, and if it comes from a charter school, that's what they're going to support.
Well, what's the last remaining connection to the established power structure in the Democrat Party? The safety of your neighborhood, the quality of your schools, the ubiquity of economic opportunity, the lack of it. I mean, the access to quality health care, but kind of every substantial quality of life metric. What is it that still ties them to that power structure?
The civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, and the fact that Democrats basically took on the civil rights movement as that we support civil rights, and they created and in large part Republicans helped them.
Right.
They were the anti-civil rights.
Well.
Okay.
Although more Republicans voted for the '64 Civil Rights Act than Democrats, because that was the era of Dixiecrats.
Got you. I hear you on that. But after then, and moving on into the 1980s, and let's face it, Jesse Jackson, when he, as a civil rights leader, became a Democrat, he sort of just merged them even closer together. The two ideals, Democratic Party, civil rights. But I think in 2015, civil rights is still a big issue. I mean, it's a big issue. But in 1915, it was this kind of issue. In 2015, it's this kind of issue.
Yeah.
And you've got other issues, economics, free market. You got how do you develop some economic wherewithal for the black community? And that is a huge issue. And in the pantheon of black leaders in history, there have been those who focused on that economic issue. I don't care if it's Booker T. Washington, Elijah Muhammad,
Yeah.
Marcus Garvey. They dealt with economics. And you had those who dealt with civil rights. But right now, nobody stops me from doing what I want to do as a black man in America. I mean, because I've got a job, I'm fine. And I think I speak for a lot of other black folks who would suggest to you that civil rights is not the issue. It's economics. It's economics. And we're doing nothing there. And what we have to do is begin to compartmentalize our politics. Well, if this guy, who happens to be a Republican, is talking about economic development and what he wants to do with economic development, let's give that guy a look. And if we think he can do it, let's give him some votes. Let's not just reject him, cast him away just because he's a Republican. If he's talking economics, if he's talking about helping my community and creating some jobs in my neighborhood, let's give that guy a look.
In 2019, who do you think is better poised for re-election? Maybe this is a straightforward question. Maybe it's complicated. Right now, 2019, and I should say 2018, who is better poised for re-election? Bruce Rauner in 2018 or Rahm Emanuel in 2019?
I think Bruce Rauner, because Bruce Rauner has, I think, very deep support in the suburbs and downstate. And you can't forget that Illinois is 600 miles stem to stern, and there's a lot of people out there who understand the problem, and they see the problem the way he sees it. I don't think he can win Cook County again, but I think he'll probably do better in 2019. I don't see anybody out there who could really beat Bruce Rauner at this point. But keep in mind, we got a long way to go on this.
And a lot of unresolved issues, as we've been discussing.
The mayor I see is having some very, very, very serious problems.
And any chance that he survives 2019? That he runs again in 2019 and survives? Does he at least run, or does he walk away? If Hillary's elected, is he looking for a soft landing at the federal level, or is he lashed to the mast and he's going to go again in 2019 regardless?
I think right now, I can't imagine how he could do it. I mean, I think Hillary Clinton, if she's elected, will offer him an escape hatch if he has to go and try to salvage some part of his political wherewithal. It could be there, but I think even then, he would need 5 years to rehabilitate himself. In this city right now, man, it's tough.
And it's funny
tough for
too.
him.
As beleaguered as he is, where are the voices? Where's that new generation, or the folks that are looking to step up in 2019? Where are they? It's been awfully quiet. Laquan McDonald, the shootings at Christmas, Eddie Jones. Where are the city council members? Where are the Cook County commissioners? Where are the business and civic leaders in the city? Been very, very quiet.
Yeah, I think he's got the smell of death on him, and I think people are kind of, keeping their distance. I noticed that one of his council allies, Will Burns, resigned just recently, just the past few days. I was telling, Will was very close to Rahm, and politically, and I think he kind of saw his political career kind of go away, because whenever he would run again, they would say, "Hey, aren't you Rahm's boy?"
Right.
And he would have a real tough time getting away from that. And I'm not saying that's why he quit, but I just think that if he had run again, he would have had to endure some of that kind of talk. And I think a lot of people are keeping their distance, supporters of Rahm Emanuel at this point. But it's still early. I've noticed that a lot of the demonstrations against him have quieted. You don't see the group of teenagers who used to follow him around saying, Rahm resign, Rahm resign. And the Coalition for a New Chicago has chilled. They're not following Rahm, and the weather's been great.
And so does that say that despite everything that's happened and the last 5 years of Rahm, and where the city finds itself as we sit here today with the schools and public safety and unfunded pensions and the kind of financial melting down of the city of Chicago, that even after all of this,
No.
the city still ain't ready for reform?
No, it's ready for reform. I think the bigger, I've always said that, this police misconduct scandal was huge. The school problem is bigger. Much bigger. And he's going to have to survive that. And if he has, and I don't think it's about a strike. I think it's about, again, bankruptcy and the schools, public education falling apart in the third largest city in America on his watch. I think that's going to be his undoing more so than even police misconduct. Because what can he do? I mean, I think the governor said just today that as far as he's concerned, there's only two ways to deal with this. And one of them is bankruptcy. It's bankruptcy or a massive tax increase. And he's not going for the tax increase. But that's the only way they're going to get out of this, a massive tax increase. In fact, the documents apparently that they're showing potential bond buyers in New York had a $200 million tax increase.
Property tax increase,
yeah.
Because that's the only way you can guarantee the revenue stream to support the bonds.
Dude, on top of
Right.
the $588 million that we're getting ready to pay.
Right. Well, and again, even those numbers, that is teaspoon meeting Titanic. We had $30 billion in unfunded police and fire pensions.
Right.
I mean,
and you have the
you can't hand out enough red light tickets.
But you have the city worker pensions that a court is about to throw out. I mean, so if this Sandag bill it comes up, this one that would allow local governments to declare bankruptcy in Illinois, city of Chicago, on Rahm's watch.
The bankrupt mayor of a bankrupt city, financially and in every other way.
And you're telling me this guy can get reelected? Or, that you're not telling me that, but I mean, someone would suggest that this guy presiding over this train wreck could get reelected in 2019? I mean, come on.
I don't know. I mean, he can go out there and say Chick-fil-A doesn't represent Chicago values, and enough people buy it again. I mean, I say that sarcastically, but I really ask the question: if the police abuse scandal, the CPS. I mean, I feel like we're sawing sawdust a little bit, but it's like trying to get your mind around this. You have the civic institutions of the city melting down, and people largely go blithely along for the people that live in the half a dozen wards that are doing well, and then the 44 wards that surround those half a dozen wards. I mean, they're just kind of captive to events, it seems to me, because they have representatives that are essentially on the take that are taking the dive for the power structure, and they don't feel like they're empowered to do anything, like they can change the course. And so we continue to get more of the same, in spite the evidence that suggests reform is needed. To make the understanding.
I mean, all you need, my brother, is a pulse. All you need is a pulse to know that Illinois,
vote or get a city job.
No, to know that Illinois needs reform.
Yeah,
that's all you need, man. You need a pulse. Illinois needs reform, and whether it's Bruce Rauner's free market reform or if it's Chuy Garcia's progressive reform, but there's got to be some change, and that's one thing that the speaker hasn't really given us. Like, which plan? The Speaker doesn't come up with a plan. He just says, we need to cut services, increase revenue.
Right.
That's what we've been. You mean I
It's
get less for more money?
The same two-step he's been doing for
So
40
he hasn't
years, and
really
it's
given
served
us-
him well.
Yeah, well, him. But I mean, you people, I think by this election, this cycle, I don't think so. But I think by the fall, it could get ugly. It could get ugly.
I think you mean uglier. All right, we're going to leave it there. Charles Thomas, ABC-7 Political Reporter. Thanks so much for joining us
man,
on this
this was
edition
fun.
of Against
I
the
enjoyed
Current.
it.
Appreciate it. Good stuff. Thank you.